Culture Crew, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Kulture Kids Storytime. Today, we will be going into Chapter 8 of the book Heart and Soul. This week, we will be discussing Harlem and the vote for women. So as we are going through the process of trying to get our feet, planted firmly in the soil and setting our families up for success, women, we have two things going against us. Number one, we're Black, and number two, we're women. So outside of just the basic rights that our people were struggling for, women had to take on a whole nother set of discrimination issues because people didn't want to treat us equally because we were girls. And so now let's kind of dive into what that looked like and what we did about it. We returned from fighting. W.E.B. Du Bois, scholar and PhD. The right to vote is ours. Have it we must. Use it we will. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women's suffragist. The summer before the war officially ended was dreadful. It was hot, people were hungry, streets were crowded because there wasn't enough work or housing. The soldiers were coming home from the war. The Southerners kept coming north, adding to the crowds. The combination seemed to make some white folks lose their good minds. Mobs of angry whites stormed into Black neighborhoods and grabbed people off the street and beat them to death. All summer long, they were burning Black folks, homes, and businesses in big cities all over the country to try and scare us away. But this generation of Black folks was different from past generations. Many of our parents and grandparents had often looked for help from good white folks in hard times like these. But this generation had grown up into its own. Many of them had graduated from public schools or Black universities like Howard and Tuskegee, and education had given them the tools they needed to move forward. We all felt like we were on a mission to uplift the race and do away with that feeling of being less than white folks. This time, we looked no farther than our front doorstep for help. It was like the souls of Black folks all over the North were waking up. Now, Chicago was something special. We had the Strip on the South Side where we could go watch a movie, see a show, or have soul food that was so good you wanted to go and slap the cook. Our Negro League baseball team, the Chicago American Giants, was the best in town. But at that particular time, most of the action was in Harlem, in New York City. Folks would come visit there looking as sharp as a tack, honey. They brought with them fancy clothes, the best jazz records. Jazz was a new kind of music where horn players, drummers, and piano players made up beautiful music right on the spot. The music would swing and sway back and forth, making us dizzy with the sound of Jelly Roll Morton, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington. They just put a spell on us. Jazz music took over the country. More jazz records sold than any other kind of music, and all the young folks couldn't get enough of it. Everybody seemed to want to learn to play an instrument and be in a jazz band. On the weekend, we would paint the town red, honey, dancing all night at the Savoy in Chicago, wearing holes in the floor. Folks talked about Josephine Baker, who danced in the Cotton Club and became a big star in Europe, and artists Aaron Douglas and Archibald Motley, who painted big pictures of Black folks strong and proud, just the way we like to see ourselves. We read Black writers from Harlem like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and James Weldon Johnson, who told our stories with beauty and style. For the first time ever, Black folks were in the limelight and the whole world was watching. The new Negroes, as author Elaine Locke called us, had arrived and we were beautiful. Black folks were as busy as a swarm of honeybees uptown in Harlem. And downtown was abuzz too. Women had decided to step out of the kitchen to get the vote and were marching up and down the streets of New York City and Washington, D.C. trying to get it. Since America was founded, women never had any say about what happened outside the home. We were expected to marry, have children, keep house, and obey our husbands. In fact, at that time, women really weren't much more than property, barely a step above being a slave. We were not allowed to own property if we were married, not allowed to attend college, not allowed any respectable career outside of teaching or nursing, and, of course, we were not allowed to vote. It wasn't fair. Half of the people in America were women and yet weren't allowed to say about how the country was being run. It was very much a man's world, and we were tired of it. Women had been fighting to get the vote since before the Civil War. Over tea and biscuits and at church rallies, old ladies and young women, black and white, wrote passionate letters to politicians and published articles in newspapers pleading their case for the vote. They even wrote a Declaration of Rights and sentiments that read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal." In the spring of 1912, women took to Washington, D.C. and New York City streets and marched for our right to vote. Black women like Ida B. Wells marched with them, and the following year, even though white women didn't want us there and made us march in the back, and the men, they tried their best to stop the march. Crowds of them gathered along the sidewalks yelling things like, "Go back to the kitchen!" and throwing trash at us. It was really something to see all of those boys treat us that way, especially since it was we, black women, who raised so many of them. We had raised many of their parents and grandparents too. Honey, it broke our hearts, but we just walked right past them. We were not going back to the kitchen. Instead, on the second day of November 1920, we marched our legs right into the voting booth because we'd finally won the right to vote. Well, it was really only Northern women who got the right to vote. The law allowed Southern women to vote, but the truth was that Southern men made it very hard for women to exercise the right at the polls. Our progress was right in step with what was happening up north. People were happy because they were working and making a little money, and there were plenty of new things to buy, like automobiles and telephones. It seems like the good times would go on forever, but there was a big storm coming, honey, and soon people everywhere would be in serious trouble. So now you see this chapter where we're talking about women's rights to vote. The fact that women had to take their plea outside of the bigger issue, which was voting rights at all for black people. But not only could we not vote because we were black, we couldn't vote because we were girls. And so just showing the evolution of this country and how we've always had to fight for every single thing that we've had or anything that we wanted to obtain due to all of the discrimination in laws and how this country was set up. So I hope you enjoyed this segment of Heart and Soul on Kulture Kids Storytime, and we will dive into hard times and World War II in our next section. Have a great one, guys. Take care.